The Don't Say Gay fight comes to Ohio. Joining us on Columbus on the Record, Andrew Tobias, State House reporter for Cleveland.com, Desiree Timms from Innovation Ohio, and Shannon Jones, former state legislator. Ohio lawmakers will consider a bill that limits what teachers can teach students about LGBT issues. It's modeled after a law in Florida and under consideration in other states. Supporters call them parental rights in education bills. Detractors call them Don't Say Gay bills. The measure would prohibit teachers from teaching about sexual orientation or gender identity into kindergarten through third grade. For older grades, through high school, teachers could not teach LGBT issues that are not age appropriate. Teachers and principals could lose their licenses if they violate the law. School districts could lose state funding. Andrew Tobias, I guess after the Florida controversy, it was only a matter of time that this would show up here in Ohio. What is the motivation behind this legislation?
Well, first off, I'll just point out that it's an election year, and so anybody who's running in a Republican primary wants to have something they can have as a feather in their cap. But this bill is kind of, a continuation of concern on the right about what they view as woke ideology that's kind of permeating different elements of kind of our cultural institutions. And in this case, the concern in schools is that teachers might be sharing information about gender identity or sexual orientation that parents might not want their kids hearing. The supporters view this as basically, parents' right to have control over the kinds of information that's shared with their children. And of course, it's an incredibly divisive cultural issue. Critics say that it's going to, marginalize people who have different sexual orientations, different identities. There are teachers who are concerned about what they're going to be restricted from saying. I mean, there's just all kind of concerns that it raises, but certainly it's not surprising to hear it come up in Ohio because this kind of cultural fight is happening across the country.
Shannon Jones, is this an issue looking for a controversy, or are there a lot of teachers doing lessons on LGBT issues, gender identity, sexual orientation in second grade in Ohio?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps it is a solution in search of a problem because nobody really has been able to surface the secret curriculum that teachers have been using to indoctrinate young children. And so, I think that Andrew is exactly right, is that this is one of the so-called culture war issues that the right has decided to, advance. And I don't think that they've done a good job of identifying the problem that they're trying to solve. But as a practical matter, they don't have to do that. That's just not the way the politics are right now.
Desiree Timms, the motivation behind some of these folks is they say that parents should have more of a say in what is being taught in their school. And do they have a point, and where is that line, especially for younger kids?
I think that what we're seeing is the Republican Party get more and more extreme by the day. The Ohio version of the bill goes a step further than the Florida version of the bill. And not only does it say don't say gay, it also bans any mention of race. It explicitly bans discussion around the 1619 Project. And when confronted with the author of this bill, Jean Schmidt, she became a track star overnight on TV running from the press. This is not about parental rights and parental control, parental choice. This is about the extreme far right wing of the Republican Party trying to unleash this culture war on the American people. It is starting state house by state house around the country, and it's receiving the rightful backlash it deserves. And I hope it doesn't go any further than being introduced.
Andrew, one of the criticisms is that the vagueness of the language. It says that the State Board of Education will decide what is age appropriate. They will set those standards, but state law says the State Board of Education cannot set those standards. So who's to decide what's age appropriate, what's developmentally appropriate?
Yeah, so lot of those kinds of like fill in the gap kinds of questions haven't occurred yet because it hasn't gone through the committee process. And of course, the bill sponsors haven't wanted to speak with the media to explain what it is they view their bill is doing and how they resolve some of these ambiguous issues in the language. But for instance, too, there's been questions from educators whether it might prohibit a student who has same-sex parents talking, if there's a family tree project, are they allowed to talk about that? There's concerns about when it talks about not just curriculum, but materials. Does that mean they're going to be pulling books out of libraries? I mean, there's just a lot of thorny issues that it raises, and we don't necessarily have a lot of the details right now just because it's so early in the process, although perhaps also the bill is intentionally vague, in order to, whatever the ends of that might be, I guess. I'm not exactly sure why.
Shannon Jones, this is one of those wedge issues that tends to motivate the fringes of both parties, both sides of the issue, the opponents and the supporters. Do Republicans run any risk that they are being portrayed as extremist again and going too far and trying to control what students can learn and also marginalizing LGBT folks?
Look, I think that you hit the nail on the head there. There are no shortage of issues that the Republicans have been utilizing to appeal to the base and to the far right of their base. In a time when this state is actively trying to recruit new industries, high-tech industries like Intel into the state, and in order to be able to provide the workforce and the environment that these big companies want for their employees, we ought to be very careful about the language that we're using and the consequences of saying that this is a state that doesn't welcome all people to it. And so, I think that this is a very thorny issue for Republicans. They don't need it to motivate their base. They've got plenty of others on the menu, and they do risk turning off. I mean, when you see Steve Stivers, the head of the Ohio Chamber, getting out in front of this before the bill is even introduced into committee, to say, look, we're really concerned about the message that this is sending to industry that may be looking at Ohio as a nation. We're trying to reshore industries into this state.
Yeah, Steve Stivers, the former Republican congressman. Desiree Timms, is there a risk for Democrats here too that, they're trying to, win the Senate seat now held by Rob Portman? They want to talk about jobs. They want to talk about economic issues, wage disparity, maybe even health care. This gets social issues back front and center. Is there a distraction risk for Democrats here, taking them off message by fighting against this so fiercely?
The Republican Party's obsession with erasing history is certainly not a distraction from the Democratic goals of getting people back to work, putting more money in folks' pockets, making sure communities are safe, bringing jobs back around the country, certainly here in Ohio. This is a distraction for the Republican Party because it seems as if they are just obsessed with erasing history, erasing fact from curriculums around the state. The truth is there are gay people in Ohio. There are gay kids in schools. Parents have, are gay and have children, and there are brown people and Black people, and we all live together here in Ohio, and that makes our state stronger. I don't know why the Republicans are so bent on disrupting a cohesive culture that we can work towards building, and that's why the Ohio Chamber of Commerce is really concerned about this bill.
Andrew Tobias, one last question on this topic. Both Governor DeWine and House Speaker Cupp said they hadn't read the bill yet, so they couldn't comment on it. Does it go anywhere? Do you see it?
It's really hard to tell. Both of those people you mentioned kind of as habit don't really comment on legislation before it's advanced. Although I will say that in Governor DeWine's instance, he kind of, softly pushed back against a transgender sports bill last summer that I believe is still stalled in the legislature, but it's not something that he necessarily takes head on, but I think he kind of tries to avoid controversial issues when he can. So whether that means that he'll take a stance when the rubber hits the road, I'm not sure. But right now, it's just really kind of hard to read between the lines on that one.
All right. At week's end, the Ohio Supreme Court had yet to rule on the fourth version of state legislative maps. The court has rejected 3 previous versions. This stalemate has raised questions about the separation of powers. The Constitution clearly separates government into three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. Each serves as a check on the others, and there are dividing lines. But occasionally those lines cross. The executive branch's law enforcement arm will prosecute lawmakers and judges. Lawmakers will impeach executives and judges. Judges will rule executive and legislative actions unconstitutional. The current redistricting fight has the Supreme Court threatening to punish lawmakers with contempt rulings, and lawmakers have threatened to impeach justices, or at least one, the Chief Justice. Shannon Jones, as a former lawmaker, under what conditions would judges, the Supreme Court, be justified in holding a lawmaker in contempt for not doing his or her job?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that this is a pretty interesting issue, and it's nice that I get to be on the outside looking in rather than the inside debating that. But I do think that with respect to redistricting, I mean, the legislature is the one that put the issue before the voters, and that process in itself was a political one, and it was full of compromises. And so the language that went forward to the voters arguably isn't as clear as it should be. And so is the Supreme Court now interpreting the law, or is the law vague? And the court's going to have to tell the legislature they have to go back to work. I mean, this is a really rare instance where the Supreme Court is called the Supreme Court for the reason that they are the ones that are the arbiters of not interpreting the law, but ensuring that the law is actually carried out. So arguably there is some lack of clarity around what it is, but I don't think it's this interpretation issue. Judges, extending exceeding their bounds by trying to interpret the law. That's what they're asked to do. The Supreme Court is asked to do it. So I think it's rare, but I think we're in the middle of one of these circumstances.
In this case, it never happened because they did file a map. I think if it was the second or third version, I've lost track, oddly enough. But the Supreme Court was going to basically haul the governor and the Secretary of State and the House Speaker, Senate President, and the state auditor into the courtroom and basically to have a contempt hearing. Desiree, is that crossing a line between the separation of powers, Desiree Tims?
I think the separation of powers is at risk because of the continued Republican obstruction that has played into the redistricting process. We know that more than 70% of Ohioans supported as they voted for a fair process, and a bipartisan group of Supreme Court justices said, hey, this map is not right. It is unconstitutional. It is flawed. It is not aligned with the will of Ohioans and how they vote. And what the Republicans are doing is they're playing footsie with the law. I think it would be really shameful if the Republican Party attempts to impeach a justice of their own party simply because she didn't side with them, simply because they disagree with her decision. People disagree all the time. But the fact of the matter is the Supreme Court is the last stop in interpreting the state's constitution. And this is how the interpretation came out. And it just so happens it's not in favor of with the Republicans who have been manipulating this process. They've spent tens of millions of dollars now. We hope that they finally get this right. But an impeachment is not the way to go.
Andrew Tobias, would it be the folks who are sort of floating the idea of impeaching the Chief Justice, the Republican Chief Justice who has sided with Democrats in this case and these cases, would they have more credibility had they said, look, let's impeach all four of the justices who have ruled these maps unconstitutional, the Republican and the three Democrats?
Yeah, so one way to interpret that disparity is that, there is basically the perception is that there's one justice who's kind of the swing vote on this. And so by making threats and pressuring that one justice, does that potentially let them get what they want? It could be a political tactic as opposed to a legal one, or maybe it's the other way around. But what they actually would say is that Maureen O'Connor, the Chief Justice, is the one who initially signed the order that basically would have hauled the other members of the the Ohio Districting Commission into court. The other 3 Democratic justices' names were on that, but I guess you can make of that what you will. That is what they say when you ask them that question.
Okay. Meanwhile, early voting has begun, and even without state legislative candidates on the ballot, the early primary season is officially underway. Republicans and Democrats are choosing their candidates for statewide offices and members of Congress. The redistricting fight has forced out one sitting congressman, even before the votes are counted. Congressman Bob Gibbs says he will retire. He lost much of his district in redistricting. Andrew Tobias, he lost a lot of his voters, and he also faces a pretty strong primary opponent.
Yeah, so Max Miller is more or less guaranteed to get the nomination in this seat. And truthfully, he'll probably win the election too, as it kind of, if you index the district, it's almost 10 points plus Republican. You think it's going to be a pretty favorable year this year generally because of the national climate. So yeah, it was a very interesting development. We were wondering whether you would see an incumbent, basically run against a Trump-endorsed candidate. We're very interested to see how that would play out. But Miller had a lot of the district that he's been campaigning in is the majority of what the district looks like. So it's not that surprising. We were hearing some rumblings about former President Donald Trump, who's endorsed Miller, possibly scheduling a rally here. I'm not sure Gibbs wanted to kind of stare that in the teeth. He's not necessarily had a lot of tough elections in recent years, and he's been talking about retiring for a while. So, it is sort of, if you just take a step back, it's surprising to see a longtime congressman kind of step out in favor of a first-time candidate. But, if you kind of break it down, you can kind of understand a little bit better why that would be.
Shannon Jones, Bob Gibbs been in office for, I think, close to 10 years, if not 10 years. Well respected, popular in his district. Are you surprised that he's a casualty of this process?
Well, the district isn't the same. I think there's only like 10% of the district are former constituents of his. So he's literally, doesn't know the constituents that he'd be asking for their vote. And, Max Miller has been campaigning for a long time, and I think has the leg up. The truth of the matter is here we are where we're losing congressional seats. And so there are always going to be casualties in that as long as we continue to lose seats. And so, getting back to the broader apportionment board conversation, it's like we at some point have to get serious as a state around how do we prevent further erosion of our influence nationally, and have to skinny down our delegation and work to ensure that in the next reapportionment we are maybe even gaining a congressional seat. So not surprising really at all that he's dropped out. These are voters that have not voted for him before.
Desiree Timms, how are Democrats viewing the upcoming midterm election for Congress? They're using the map, sort of, we could call it almost an interim map because it's going to be challenged, it's still being challenged, and by 2024 it could change again. Are Democrats basically just going to support the 3 strong candidates they have now and wait till 2024? Are they kind of writing off 2022?
I think the Democratic strategy is always to run everywhere and play everywhere and get involved everywhere. But what we're seeing are real hardships and barriers due to the failed redistricting process under Republican leadership. When we're talking about Congressman Gibbs retiring, we're thinking about, okay, this says 2 things. One, that redistricting is really impacting both Republicans and Democrats in a meaningful way, in a way that's not fair, that's not realistic, because while they carved out his district, they saved Steve Chabot's district and refused to draw a fair district for the people of Cincinnati. And 2, Donald Trump still has his thumb on the Republican Party in such a meaningful way. And this is more about what the Republican Party is going to do during these midterms. They need to do some soul searching. Are they going to cave and continue to steer farther right? Or are they going to come to the middle and meet people where they are? That's where most of Ohioans are, in the middle. And that's where our politics have to get back to. But that's not where we are right now. And redistricting is a mirror image of that process.
The big race, of course, on the Republican side, probably the biggest race in the primary fight, arguing on certainly on the Republican side. The Democratic governor's race is also a pretty tight race. But the U.S. Senate race on the GOP side, Andrew Tobias, another debate this week. It was just as nasty and as personal as the other ones have been. And still no one has broken away from the pack in that race.
Yeah, there's been some polls that came out this week, and both of them were sponsored by campaigns. Essentially, one of them was an outside group, but it was a pro JD Vance super PAC, so the distinction's kind of just technical. Showed different results. One of them showed JD Vance tied for first. One of them showed him in fifth. The spread between those two positions is something like 8%. The margin of error in a poll is something like 4%, which basically covers that. So it's really hard to tell where this one's going. I mean, you see the attack ads is one of the things that I use to try to measure what the campaigns think the race looks like. I mean, Jane Timken had some more ads taken out against her by the Club for Growth today, which is an organization that's supporting Josh Mandel. You see Mike Gibbons, who has kind of positioned himself as a front runner in the race, attacking Vance and Timken. Mandel and Gibbons, or Josh Mandel and Gibbons, have been attacking each other. I mean, it's kind of a free-for-all. So, it's very difficult to know what to make of the race. One of the things we've been waiting for is a Donald Trump endorsement, which might kind of be an external event that would push one of the candidates over the top. That doesn't seem to be happening. So, yeah, I just kind of scratched my head, honestly, trying to predict where this one's going to go. Yeah,
one thing that happened this week is Josh Mandel released a TV ad which calls critical race theory, quote, crap, right off the bat. And then Josh Mandel is walking on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Alabama saying that Martin Luther King marched so skin color would not matter. Desiree Timms, I want to get your take on that. Is he correct there, Josh Mandel?
Josh Mandel tried to explain Black history to Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter and has engaged in a very public backlash on Twitter to explain that to a Black woman who is also the daughter of one of the leaders of the civil rights movement. It is disgusting. We've also seen J.D. Vance air an openly racist attack at Mike Gibbons. They are obsessed with race, critical race theory, and again, talking about history. I don't know why they're leaning into these culture wars, but it's not working. It certainly doesn't work for the people of Ohio, but I don't know, maybe their polls are showing or saying something that we don't know, but I don't understand why they're leaning into these actions and these items instead of talking about how they're going to put money in folks' pockets, help people's bills go down, and keep the young people in Ohio who are fleeing the state because of extreme policies and commercials that they're watching every day by these guys who want to be their senator. Yeah. It doesn't make sense.
All right, just a couple minutes left. We'll get to our last topic. Supporters called it a revolutionary new mode of interstate transportation. Detractors called it a pipe dream. The dream of connecting Columbus to Pittsburgh and Chicago with vacuum tubes is dead, at least for now. The Hyperloop promised to whisk passengers from Columbus to Chicago in 30 minutes. The Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission got on board. It released a report 2 years ago saying it was possible. Notably, the study did not include the cost of the project or a ticket to ride. The developer, Virgin Hyperloop, has switched its focus from transporting passengers through the tubes to moving freight. Desiree Timms, the city didn't invest a lot in this, but they gave this project some credibility. It was always a bit far-fetched, I think. Was it wise to embrace this project as the city did?
I certainly think it was wise to embrace the project as we think about innovation and technology and the way of the future. We've been seeing projects like this in China. And I think people here in Ohio would love to be connected to the people of Chicago. So I'm certainly devastated that we won't have the Hyperloop, but I'm hoping through infrastructure dollars, through past projects promised under the Obama administration that was, denied under Kasich's leadership, to finally get some high-speed rail, maybe the Amtrak, to connect all the cities across the state together and get us connected to Chicago for a good slice of pizza, although now we have a battle on our hands with that.
Critics say, Desiree, that by focusing on Hyperloop, it hurt those efforts to bring trains to Columbus. Do you agree?
I disagree with that. I think the Hyperloop is a very specific project. And we have people who are comfortable and uncomfortable with getting in a tube, shooting to Chicago in 30 minutes. But a lot of people love the Amtrak, people who remember what Amtrak was like. And we've seen it work up and down the East Coast. And we deserve that here in Ohio, too. And I know that's what people want. There was a lot of excitement when the 3CD loop was circulating and trending on the internet around the state about, wow, I can connect Cincinnati to Cleveland and Columbus to Pittsburgh and Detroit. It's very popular here in the state.
All right, let's get to our off-the-record final parting shots. Desiree Timms, real quick, what's your final thought?
This week, we saw some very exciting news, both in the Senate chamber and on the White House lawn with future Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. We're really excited to see her confirmation and look forward to seeing her being sworn in as the first African-American woman Supreme Court Justice.
All right, Shannon Jones, 20 seconds.
With less than 4 weeks until the election, the Republicans have failed to mount a serious campaign in the primary against Mike DeWine, and the Democrats have failed to mount a campaign against Mike DeWine to prove why he should be he shouldn't deserve a new term. I think he's going to emerge winning both the Republican and the Democrat primaries, and will be stronger for it heading into the November election.
Okay, and Andrew, 20 seconds for you. Your final thought.
Yeah, this week Sherrod Brown recorded a commercial for Nan Whaley, who's the former Dayton mayor who's running for governor. And, it's just an ad, but I think in that race that her primary opponent, John Cranley, is the former mayor of Cincinnati, not a lot of differentiation between them, not a lot of a name ID across the state. So I think that getting support from somebody like Sherrod Brown could really help her in her campaign, and that might push her over the top.
All right, my off-the-record comment, I was in Spain on vacation, took a high-speed train from Madrid to Valencia. It was nice. Why can't we have nice things like that here? I was wondering as I took that train at 200 miles an hour. That is Columbus on the Record. Thanks to our panel and to our crew. Check us out online, WOSU.org. For our crew and for our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.